Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming tonight. I'm just here to do a short introduction and then we'll get into the actual presentation. I want to thank Wayne and Paul for coming and doing this with us, and the Friends of the Library for sponsoring it for us. And welcome you all to the Dukeman Room for Pam. Yeah, woo! Yeah. At Wentworth Hall at the Islington branch. Let's see. So I tried to make it short and sweet. I'm sorry. I didn't expect the applause. That was not planned.
Or the pointy.
Yes. So Wayne Miller was a special agent, a criminal investigator, and a certified fire investigator for the U.S. Treasury, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms for over 25 years. He has been involved in numerous high-profile criminal cases, and he was a member of the ATF National Response Team who responded to major fire and explosion incidents, as well as writing 2 books, both of which we have for sale at the end of the night for you. And Paul Sicard has worked... You needed that, I know. Has worked for the Westwood Police Department for over 30 years in many capacities, including working with the police explorers in the local schools and much more. He's an avid reader and extremely involved in my true crime book club, which I encourage everyone to join if you enjoy this presentation, because this is the kind of book we read. And he's always found floating around town helping out however he can. So, without further ado, I will turn it over to the 2 of you.
Thank you. Turn it on.
Thank you much. Appreciate it, Kristen. And thank you to the Friends of the Library and to Claire and to Paul for doing this. I just want to start out. I was supposed to be here 8 weeks ago. Many of you know that. And some people showed up and didn't have a registration. It was a tough way to lose 15 pounds. I was laying in bed in Milford Hospital, and I asked the doctor on Tuesday before the Wednesday event, I said, can I check out of here and do tomorrow night and then check back in? My wife said, no way. I was on morphine too. I had pancreatitis. And so in 6 days on just a drip, no food, 15 pounds. I'm lighter now than I've been in about 40 years. So it's a hard way to do it, but I did it. So Paul's got some questions, and I don't think they're going to be easy ones.
All right, well, thank everybody for being here. Just wanted to explain how I wound up getting stuck up here in the front. I actually had met Wayne a long time ago without realizing it, and then I bought a raffle ticket for a charity auction that had a series of autographed books in it, and one of them was Burn, Boston, Burn. So I'm an avid reader, so I was thrilled to win that prize, and I'm reading through the books, and I'm like, wow, I like this book. So I learned a lot from the book. I was shocked about some of the things I learned, and a few months later, I'd signed up for his Facebook page, and there was an announcement he was writing another book, and it was coming out. So when it was available, I ordered it. And then I get an email from him saying, I can drop it by the police station if you want. And I'm like, oh, great, save me the postage. That's awesome.
Save me the postage.
That's right, I still paid the full price, didn't I? Yes. So Wayne shows up at the station, and I thank him for coming in, and he says something like, page 172. And I'm like, what's page 172? And he's like, oh, that's the page your name is on. And I'm like, my name's in the book? He's like, yeah. He goes, I figured that's why you were buying it. And I said, no, I was buying it because I liked the first one. So his assumption was that I'd gotten word that my name was in it. So we'll talk a little bit more about the second book and why my name was in it in a little bit. But being part of Kristen's book club, I had suggested Wayne as a possible speaker and got roped into coming in here and moderating, I guess they called it. I don't know. I have no idea what I'm supposed to do, but I've got a few questions for Wayne.
You got it.
All right, so Wayne, could you tell us about a little bit about your career, starting with how you wound up with the ATF in the first place?
Sure. I went to Bryant College, which is now Bryant University in Rhode Island. Started out before that UConn in engineering, and I hated it after a semester. So the next year I was at Bryant, and they had a law enforcement night, and one of the people there came from ATF. ATF as a bureau, a separate bureau, only came in existence in 1972. And so not many people knew about them. But their history goes way back to 1779, the first tax on alcohol and tobacco. So I applied to ATF. I finished very high in my law enforcement, my criminal justice class, but I graduated with no job. Very disappointing in a sense. So I went to work for, well, I had already worked for a year and a half for the state of Rhode Island, the Division of Drug Control, doing undercover work in the state of Rhode Island, but not at the college. And then Dennis PD in the summertime, but as an undercover cop. I only went to the station twice the entire year. And the following, I worked, the wintertime, I worked at Killington Ski Resort as security. I just wanted to keep my hand in it a little bit, but I skied 60 days. Then in April, I got a call to be interviewed for the job, and I got on June 21, 1976. Sounds like a long time ago. And I did gun cases my first 4 years. There's a couple of them in the second book, including a .46 machine gun seizure that we had in Walpole, Mass. Not at the prison, at a house. And some undercover work I did. And I really wanted to do fires, and I got involved with that by 1980 when ATF got serious about it. I volunteered for the Arson Task Force when it was formed in March 1982. And I specialized eventually in origin and cause, figuring out where the fire started and how it started. And I did that until I retired from ATF in 2001, sorry. And then I went private for another 18 years. But altogether, I've been at 2,300 incidents in 43 states. And Puerto Rico, where 97 died in the DuPont Plaza Hotel fire. And it's kept me quite busy, and I loved it. You get very dirty, and you breathe in a lot of bad stuff. But luckily, I don't have any cancer at this point.
That's good news. So what inspired you to get into the world of writing? Was it this particular case, or had you had aspirations before that?
You know, even I thought about it way back. Even back in high school, I loved to write, but yet I knew this was a story that should be written. But while I was working on the private side, I didn't really have the time, and you just keep putting things off and putting things off. So a Boston Globe reporter contacted one of my former supervisors, the U.S. Attorney, and me, and we had a meeting at a house in Duxbury. And he was going to do the Sunday magazine, you know, the Globe magazine, like a 6 or 8 page article. But he also said, I might do a bigger project, like writing a book. I think it was the next night is when I started. This is January 2018. I started typing away, and I had a lot of records. Greg Bemis is one of the arsonists. I interviewed Greg for 200 to 400 hours after he finally confessed, and we debriefed him. We went to every single fire scene, no matter what was there, an empty lot, a burned out hulk of a building, or a rehab place. And tape recorded. Who were you with? What did you do? So I interviewed him for that and then prepped for 2 trials. So I spent a lot of time with him. And when he went to prison, he wrote a 163-page, single-spaced, typed journal, which I have. So when you read Burn, Boston, Burn, a lot of, especially the first half of it, it reads like fiction because the words of the arsonist, Greg, gave me the words. They talk back and forth. Now, full disclosure, Paul, I'm having dinner with Greg Bemis tomorrow night. We have a professional, friendly, weird relationship. And his birthday happens to be this week, and I take him out every year, his birthday week, and we have contact about 10 times a year. So,
Awesome.
oh, I wanted to write the second book because I had the bug.
There you go. Now you're hooked. All right, so this one I was kind of curious about, both in terms of writing the case and also investigating the case originally. I know a lot of times police departments, fire departments, governments aren't too thrilled with people poking around in their business. Did you run into any resistance, either writing the book or in the investigation part?
No. ATF didn't even respond. I sent letters to legal counsel to see if there was any issues. They never responded back, so I just kept going. It's easier to commit the sin and deal with it later than get permission sometimes. As far as Boston Fire and Boston Police, I didn't get permission from anybody, and I didn't have any resistance. But, I did talk to quite a few people along the way, interviews, support from people. But, no, nobody gave me any trouble.
That's good to hear. Did you learn anything that surprised you during your research that you didn't know about during the case itself?
That's a good question. Reviewing the things and looking at Greg's journal, although I had it before, just how crazy they were. To have 8 guys, and a 9th one eventually, but 8 guys who wanted to burn not only the city of Boston, but other places because of Proposition 2.5. Because, this is like Boston Tea Party on steroids, because Boston Tea Party, dumped a lot of the king's tea, but to stop burning buildings, to make a point so people would get upset, and then the press would pick it up and put pressure on the fire department and put pressure on Mayor Kevin White to rehire. Boston lost 600 firefighter positions in 2 years out of 1,700. What's that percentage, like 36, 37? Yeah, something like that, right? So, and they closed 22 firehouses in Boston. So, to actually start writing it down on paper, what these guys were doing, it still amazed me. And this was 35 years later. And then I found out something very disturbing that was new, totally new. Ray Norton was a Boston firefighter, full-time Boston firefighter. When we arrested him, we knew that he hung around with a lot of young teenage, or 12-year-old, 13, 14. But we interviewed some of them, and nobody said anything bad, that he did anything, that would be like a pedophile or anything like that. Well, when I looked him up, he was like 70 years old. He got convicted for sex charges. He's now on the register here in Massachusetts, and it was because of some young boys that he ended up fooling around with. And, a lot of people have contacted me since I wrote these books. I get emails and Facebook contacts from strangers. The longest email I ever had was from a victim of Ray Norton. And he described how they actually went to New York and set fires, which I didn't know about, before they started setting the Boston fires. And this kid was upset when he read my book and learned about Ray Norton being a convicted pedophile, because he said, I could have stopped this years ago. Now, I'm not a counselor, but I told the kid, nobody would have listened to you years ago, because it was just a different time. And Ray used to he was best friends with this kid's father. He used to go, your dad and I are best friends. Like, he's not going to believe you anyway. And then he'd also say, I'll burn your house down if you say anything. So that type of thing really hit you.
Nope, definitely. And that's something that, I found throughout my career too. A lot of times somebody gets arrested and convicted for, something dramatic, like 8 rapes or something like that. We know that that's only the tip of the iceberg. That's what you can prove. So, when you look at how much they were able to prove that these people did, it's probably way more than that. I'll tell you one thing that I learned. I was a young boy just getting involved in the Police Explorers in Westwood when this was all happening, and Prop 2.5 came out and everything. I was under the impression that it was firefighters that were doing this to try and prove that they needed more firefighters. Reading the book, I was shocked to learn that it was more cops than firefighters. There was a couple of firefighters involved, but mostly police officers, some dispatchers. So that kind of shocked me as well. Well, now that we went from a nice, easy one, let's... True crime can sometimes sensationalize or exploit real tragedies. How do you ensure that your work maintains a sense of respect and empathy for the victims and their families?
The detective's coming out. He's asking tough questions. If you stick with the facts and don't get too gory, like the first one, nobody died, but 200 firefighters got hurt. And I mentioned that in October 2nd, 1982, that they collapsed through a roof in South Boston, and 22 guys got severely hurt. But I only mentioned that they got broken bones, broken backs, broken legs, burns, that type of thing. In the second book, where I describe a couple bombings, I try to stay away from the gore. And even so, I had one scene where a woman and a man both got killed instantly. It was my scene out of, that's in the second book. There's a 50-year-old guy dating a 30-year-old American Indian woman. Her family did not like him whatsoever and tried to break them up. So he sent 6 Christmas packages to her family members. 4 of them exploded, killing 5 people. So it's hard, but you don't sensationalize it in your writing.
Thank you. This next question is one of my personal favorites, and Kristen will know where this one came from. What role does story playing tell in your books? How do you balance the factual aspects of your case with engaging narrative techniques? And just as a little disclaimer, we had a book that I read that I got all the way through the book. It was supposed to be a true crime book, and in the author notes, the guy mentions that he took some artistic liberty with some of the facts he had tied in, and it was a local book too, about local cases, that when I read it, I'm like, I didn't know these cases were related. He made half of it up for his book, and I didn't know it till afterwards. So how do you balance the two, the true facts from keeping it interesting?
Every single part of my 2 books is facts. There's no embellishment, nothing made up. The only thing, you put a verb in, or a adverb, or a adjective. How many times did I write 3-decker? How many times? And sometimes I changed it to triple-decker. Until our good friend who passed away a few months ago, Jim Flaherty,
Yep.
a Norwood firefighter, Jim said, Wayne, don't call it a triple-decker when you're talking to people. That's a sandwich. A 3-decker. So
That would be Jimmy Stott, too.
that
It is
would
a
be Jimmy.
sandwich.
So, but that's how I did it, and that's how it's tough. Every once in a while, you want to put something, but I didn't. However, when the TV show comes out, an 8-part series is possible. Sold the rights to producers. The screenwriter who grew up here in Massachusetts but lives in LA has done a summary of the 8 parts, and they call it a Bible so they can try to sell it to Netflix or whoever. And he stuck to the book about 80%.
That's not bad.
Yeah, he added a couple things to make it So it's more inclusive, for one thing, and juicing up a couple of things. Like, I did get divorced back in '91, and he's going to make it the case is what caused my divorce. Well, the case was over by '85.
He's not going to tell you what really caused it.
Just me being an idiot. No. She grew up. She was too young, and she grew up, and we grew apart. But
All right. Your second book, Bang, Boom, Burn, which I always get them mixed up in the wrong order. Bang, Boom, Burn is quite different from the first one. The first one being all about one big case, and the second one being a series of short stories. Did you enjoy one more than the other, or was one easier or harder than the other?
well, I think my baby would be Burn, Boston, Burn. And by the way, that rolls off the tongue much easier than Bang, Boom, Burn. But I wanted to stick with the BBB, sort of like a series almost, you know, that type of thing. But
Hint, hint, hint.
yeah. So I did enjoy writing the long story. I had a lot more records there. But on the other hand, the other one gave me a chance to branch out to 21 individual stories, all cases I worked on. Some of it I didn't have any records for. Some of it came from memory only, such as a case in Maine where I did not think I was going to make it home. I thought I was going to be buried. Anybody know where China Lake is? I had no clue, but I spent the entire day driving with the bad guys around China Lake, and I thought for sure I wasn't going to come home that night. And but that gave me a story to give you more of my heart. And the same thing with the last chapter on the Worcester warehouse fire, the Worcester 6. Died December 3rd, 1999, 6 firefighters from Worcester. I was there from that very first night. I was there for the next 10 days, and I'm one of the 3 people that wrote the report. But when I saw the firefighters, when I saw their faces, when I saw the angst and the misery on their faces, I want you to read that last chapter to feel what I was feeling. There's a great book, 3,000 Degrees, and I suggest you read it. When I read it as part of research again for this chapter, I didn't want to rewrite what he wrote, but that book brought me back. It's the one fire out of all the fires that has made me cry, and made me cry recently. So that's why I enjoyed the second one too.
Should have brought some tissues with me, sorry.
Probably.
Since we got some Westwood people in the room, in Bang, Boom, Burn, there was one of the cases about a Westwood case. Can you tell us a little bit about that case, in case they're interested?
Sure. So as part of it, there's about 14 arson cases in there. And there's serial arson cases and something we call reverse stings, where we actually hire an arsonist, and that's explained in the book. I don't think I have time for that tonight. But the Westwood fire happened right on High Street, on the corner of Pond Street.
Pond Street, right
Yep.
by the Sheehan School, the white building
Right.
right at the corner.
We worked a lot of arson for profit cases, and the feds can't take a house fire, and that was a house fire, even so it was a 2-family residential rented out. We would have to take that type of fire to a state court because it doesn't fit under federal guidelines. So that fire happened on a summer night, and the way it went down, there was a patrolman who drove behind the school, and he's making his loop around the school. And I got a little map in the book, and if I did that slide presentation. And as he comes around the far end of the school, a man comes walking, almost bumps into the cruiser, comes walking by. I think he had a white shirt and jeans on. And he didn't stop for the cruiser. He barely looked at him. And he continued on. And there's a car parked in the parking lot. And he walks right past the car, and continues on through a little strip of woods, and then there's fields and then houses and stuff like that. Eventually, this guy is running through people's backyards, okay? His wife was sitting in the car in the parking lot. He didn't stop for his own car. The wife left the parking lot right after the cruiser pulled out. She didn't turn her lights on. It was dark enough that you should have lights on. The cruiser pulled her over. What's going on? Oh, I was waiting for my husband. He was supposed to meet a couple kids down at the corner to give keys back. We kicked him out. We're going to do some renovations, that type of thing. He goes, what house? Oh, that one? The one with the smoke coming out of it? That's how fast it happened. And there's something that I never thought about back then. If you want to talk about white privilege or professional privilege, I had a couple cases in Norfolk County, one involving a dentist. I'm not an anti-dentite. It was a fire that occurred in Dover with him. And this one had the husband and wife were school teachers in a nearby town. I don't actually use their names just because I didn't want to cause any further issues. I don't think I could have gotten sued because they did go to trial. But what happened in trial is a whole nother thing. Anything more you want on that one?
No, that's pretty much it.
They arrested both of them that night, which was really fast. And his clothing and shoes did have combustible liquid residue on them. And it was just a simple pour. And Billy was an investigator lieutenant probably back then. He's a former chief here and past chief in Westwood. And I thank him and his wife for coming. And Billy was driving by on High Street about the same time that the officer reports this fire. And it's just coincidence he was driving by. But it was a simple pour from the basement to the second floor level in the stairwell. And a very easy fire for us to figure out what happened.
Yep. You got to read the book to find out what happened at trial. But
Got to tease you a little bit.
as a little side note, I was off duty. I grew up by the Stanford Drive, so just up the street. But when we heard everything going down, went down to see what was going on. And I wound up assisting the officer, Paul McCarthy, the one who caught them, back off in the what they call the Loop now. They didn't call it the Loop back then, but Glen Road in that neighborhood. And that's where they had met up, and he stopped them. And I wound up handcuffing her. And the hard part was she was a family friend that we had grown up with here in Westwood. And we spent time at their beach house down the Cape. Their parents came over our house, or our parents went over their house every Sunday. And that kind of put an end to that family friendship, I think. But that's one of the hard parts of working in a small town like this. You do wind up having to do stuff like that. But it was an interesting case. All right. Do you have any advice for any aspiring nonfiction authors, like somebody who wants to write about being a small-town cop outside of Boston or something like
that? First of all, you need to write about something that people are going to want to read.
Oh, there we go.
You know, I'm fortunate enough that Burn, Boston Burn has probably sold like 13,000 copies, which isn't bad, but as you compare it to, like I said, to the two women over there, you compare it to the Michelle Obamas that sell several million. But I'm still pretty proud of my accomplishments. So research, put it together factually, be able to back it up, and then if you want to deal with organized crime, try to traditionally publish it. That's what I think of publishing. They want a one page, only one page. Don't do anything more. You have to get an agent first. And to get the agent, you have to have the one page. And the first 3 lines has to grab that agent. Otherwise, it goes in the trash. And then you have to have a platform. Platform means an audience. You have to have an audience. So I told them in my first letter, there's 58,000 fire departments in the United States with 1.2 million firefighters. There are about 1.4 million police officers. You get fire buffs, because fire buffs was a big thing relating to this case. Fire buffs are fans of fire items and fires themselves. Sort of like a baseball fan. Well, they collect trading cards, that type of thing, but memorabilia. And they
Also known as Sparkies.
Yes, Sparks and Sparkies, 2 terms. So if you want to get published that way, it's very difficult to do. But now in this world, you're not looked down at as much as 10 years ago when you self-publish a book. But if you're going to do it, make sure you get good editors, because I didn't have a good editor the first time. And this spring, I reduced Burn Boston Burn by 5,000 words. It still is 148,000 words. And it still could probably be whittled down by a good editor. I had a better editor on the second one, but still, it's tough. It's tough to get a good editor.
I'm going to throw a little 10-second commercial out here for another book that I'm mentioned in. Bruce Cook, who's sitting over here, recently put a book out called, raise your hand, Bruce, so they know who you are.
Between the White Lines.
It's called Between the White Lines, about his job here in Westwood as a crossing guard. It's a great book. Just throw that little plug out there. Everybody should take a look at it. Now, going back to Burn Boston Burn, how did you wind up getting assigned this case?
I don't know.
That was an easy one.
That's the true answer. When we had the arson task force, there was, I think, 8 or 9 agents and a supervisor. And when these fires started in February of 1982, the group itself, our group, the arson task force, had a Boston lieutenant with us in our squad room. And we were running from fire to fire to fire all spring long into the summer and stuff. And somehow, I don't know how, I got this case.
All right. I think you kind of already talked about this, but what surprised you about the men involved in this case? Anything other than?
How do you get one Boston police officer, 2 other guys, Boston Housing Authority police officers, 1 full-time Boston firefighter, and almost all of them, out of the 8, 9 guys, wanted to be firefighters. But they're involved with, they put up their hand to swear to serve and protect type of things. How do you get a group together to conspire to do this? And then they hurt firefighters regularly. June 3rd, 1982, Sparrow Toy Company, 1,000 feet long by 300 feet wide. 33 firefighters got hurt at that fire. And they'd go out the next day and start setting more. How do you justify that?
All right. Your opinion, what do you think broke the case?
Oh, I know what broke the case. And it wasn't my work. Again, we were running around. We'd have a list of maybe 18 people, potential suspects. And remember, you got 600 firefighters who lost their jobs. Any one of them could be a suspect, any group. You also have board-up companies. You have pyromaniacs. You have, pyromaniac wouldn't really have done this type of work. It had to be a little bit more organized. But we would talk to people. And just like the machine gun case I had, Jimmy Donahue, some of you people knew Detective Donahue down in Walpole. I was such good friends with Jimmy that he called me instead of the DA's office he was supposed to call, because we developed friendships. And I had developed a friendship with Nat Whittemore. If you don't know the name, it's because he wasn't on TV. He was behind the camera. He was a cameraman for 35 plus years. I'm having lunch with him tomorrow, and then having dinner with Greg tomorrow night. I got to watch my waistline.
Trying to put the weight back on there.
No. But Nat is also a fire buff. He's a member of the Boston Sparks Association. He's my biggest supporter after my wife. This is his legacy, he said, this book. Nat was at the November 21 fire, 1982, and he happened to hear a crew of people being very boisterous, loud, cheering the fire, cheering the home team. Who's the home team? The fire is the home team, not the fire. Firefighters are visitors to that fire, right? They were cheering for the home team. And Nat knew a couple of these guys, and they were really being obnoxious. He put his camera right on them. The Boston cop, Bobby Grabluski, out of uniform, had an army jacket on. If I could get this video to go, you'd see him. Waved his gun in the air for about 2.5, 3 seconds. Caught on tape. Because of that, BZ invited Boston PD and Fire and ATF to the studio the next day to watch the raw footage. After seeing that, we identified a few of those individuals. It doesn't make them arsonists, right? It just makes them idiots. And they've seen at a lot of fires because sparks go to a lot of fire back then when fires were so rampant. We knocked on Bobby Grabluski's door, his apartment, my partner and I, Billy Murphy. And right over there on the floor in his living room was a firebox. You know, the kind that were on pedestals on the side of buildings, poles. Back then you could actually talk to Boston Fire Alarm and actually report the fire too. But they're all considered stolen property. 14 of them were missing that year. Normally, in a normal year, you get 1 to 2 missing. There were hundreds, almost maybe even 1,000 of them in Boston at the time, but 14 of them were missing. That was box 1712. That was number 1 on the list for missing that year. Bobby got charged with receiving stolen property, and he was sent up to the turret, which is the dispatch area in Boston. Took his gun away, not on the street anymore. But he came in for a polygraph with an attorney. Flunked it badly. I don't know what his game was. He flunked it. It gave us a lead into these people. His attorney said he can't talk, so we didn't talk to him again. That was December when he came in. We didn't talk to him again until January 1984. Not January of 83. 13 months later is when we talked to him again, because there was an internal affairs investigation. But because of that, we knocked on doors of Greg Bemis, Ray Norton, Wayne Sandin. Wayne Sandin eventually gave me some information about a stolen car. You want to hear how crazy these guys are? They stole a brand new, unmarked cruiser that was destined for Randolph PD to upgrade their own personal cruisers. They would ride around in Chevy Malibus and LTDs, black walls, antenna, to look like, disguised as cops in the middle of the night when they're going to set fires. They stole that car, stripped parts for their own, and then dumped it in the Fort Point Channel. He told me that in August 1983. Because of that, we now had major theft charges against Grabluski, and because of that, Grabluski confessed, finally. So it was first the video, second going out and picking up that car out of the water
Must have been fun pulling that out of the water, too.
The Boston dive teams and both police and fire did a great job and recovered a couple other cars in the same spot.
I'm not surprised. Not surprised. Before we open it up to questions, did you want to show some photos from the investigation?
Yes. So I normally just go right through a story. Why the subtitle? The largest arson case in the history of the country. That's a quote. On the cover of the book, I don't have quotation marks around it. I never had. Oh, by the way, both these covers were done by my son-in-law, Mike Clark. I know it looks a little too close to each other. Yeah, but I love the way he put the flames right through the Boston. The picture on the right on the top on Bang, that almost looks like a firefighter on fire. That is a photograph at the Worcester Warehouse fire. Roger Conant was kind enough to let me use that. Any slides you see with pictures here is because of the kindness of Bill Noonan, a retired Boston firefighter who was a photographer with them for 35 plus years. But so Bill Weld actually said to the press, this was the largest arson case in the history of the country. And that's why I have it on the cover, but it should have had quotation marks. I never corrected Mike, who did the cover. It has a period at the end. And there's other fire arson cases now that might be bigger, but not confirmed as bigger. Mine, I have 264 confirmed buildings were burned, and then add about 100 dumpsters on top of that. Dumpsters are minor compared to these buildings. But, so.
And those are just the confirmed.
That's right. This is the largest arson case in the history of the country, period. Okay. So, that's how it got that. Just briefly, I did work the Hotel DuPont Plaza. 97 died on New Year's Eve. I was on an 8 o'clock a.m. flight to Puerto Rico on New Year's Day as part of a national response team. And Meridian Bank Building, I was one of 3 people that wrote that report. That was a 32-story high-rise downtown Philadelphia, which they actually took down after this fire. Eventually they took down. It's sort of like the Wall Street of Philadelphia. And 3 firefighters died up around the 24th floor. And then the Worcester Cold Storage. So I worked some big cases besides the Olympic bombing. I was there for 7 weeks. Boston was burning. Big cities in the United States were all burning in the late 70s into the 80s. I love showing this to people who don't know Boston, but just quickly for the local people here. You know, you can see Franklin Park, which is Dorchester, down here into Mattapan and North Quincy, West Roxbury, Brookline, for my Brookline friends. The South End, South Boston, and Back Bay, and then we go north across the river. The reason I show this picture, and it is a map now in my book, it only came in, I put it in there in April, is because I put this one on the facing page. That is the first 107 fires set by this crew. Can you see over there? The reason I didn't put all 264 is because it would have been a mess. I got tired after putting those pins in there. If you know Boston at all, this is like Blue Hill Avenue. So they used Blue Hill Avenue regularly, and you'll see that name often in the book, and they would go left and they would go right and set their fires, a lot of them. Greg Bemis was a call firefighter out in Acton, Stowe, dispatcher for Acton, Stowe eventually, and then a Boston Housing Authority police officer. Lenny Kendall was his best friend out there. These kids, they grew up loving fires and wanting to be Boston firefighters. Grabowski was a Boston cop. He wanted to be a firefighter. Donald Stackpole owned a security company which had a trailer in Southie, which played a big part in the story. Ray Norton was the full-time Boston firefighter. Joe Gorman was the tallest one in the group. He's the only one that didn't want to be a firefighter. He wanted to be a state trooper. But his dad, just like so many of these are all Sparks, these guys, okay? Sparks is the nickname, the terminology for fire buff. And again, like the Boston Sparks Association is a legitimate group, over 100 years old. Arthur Fiedler was a member because he liked fire stuff. At the Boston Fire Museum, if you go on Congress Street, there's a lot of helmets down there that he gave to the museum. Okay, they collect equipment, even fire trucks and stuff like that, and they run to fires. But Joe Gorman's dad took him when he was a kid. Wayne Sandin, I mentioned his name, he was the one who started giving me information, but not direct information about fires. He was like, cast the line, Wayne Miller was biting it, and he had me on the line, and he just kept teasing me with some information, not giving me a lot. And
They think they can steer you away from the information you're trying to get to if they give you a little bit of something.
he became a double agent too, is what he was doing. And then Mark Svenby was the last arsonist conspirator. He ended up being the youngest after Greg. And then Chris Damon, this poor kid, he lived across the street from Donald Stackpole growing up, but moved to Cincinnati, Ohio. Well, when Grabowski was the first one arrested, Stackpole got nervous and said, you know, I'm afraid he might talk. So, Chris, can you take care of him out there in Cincinnati, get a job and put him in a, house him out there? Chris said yes. He joined the conspiracy is what he did. He ended up going to prison for what he's just doing that. Conspiracy, quickly, 2 or more people. Ron, you and I are going to burn this place tonight. We can talk all we want, right? We're okay. But if you go out and buy the gasoline or come back with the bottle of Molotov or something, then you committed an overt act. Well, let me tell you, these guys committed the overt act 264 times, plus made a device almost 264 times. So that's now over 500 times they've violations of just federal law. Grabowski, Mark Svenby. The lump over here is Donald Stackpole. And most of us know Prop 2.5. Very simply, it came in on November 4th, the same day as Greg Bemis's birthday, 1980, when Greg turned 20. And President Reagan was elected, same time. If you own a piece of property worth $100,000, it can only be taxed at $2,500. And, there's a lot more to it, but that's how simply it is. What happened was we have so many old towns and cities. Think of the old cities Massachusetts has. A lot of those properties back 1980, something in the Back Bay, a brownstone, I could have had it for 17 grand, okay? I remember that. Kicked myself afterwards. But how do you get enough taxes when it's limited to pay the usual suspects? Who's that? School teachers, police, and fire, right? And that's why Boston lost so many firefighter positions. That's the first fire they set. That's in Roxbury. That was on February 19th, 1982. They also set this one eventually about a year later, even so it's boarded up already. It's brick. Their favorite targets were 3 families. There were so many abandoned properties. How many abandoned properties in Boston now? Not very many. Question?
So these guys were not firefighters themselves, they were just sparkies, firefighters. So they felt badly that the department got decimated by the cuts and said, we're gonna light so many fires that the city will have to hire more firefighters. Is that basically what they did?
That's basically what they did. I called it a twisted version of Robin Hood. Instead of stealing from the rich, give to the poor, burn enough places so people get hired back, and reopen the firehouses. So when they weren't getting quite enough press from burning triple deckers, they also did commercial buildings. That Sparrow Toy Company, which is going to come up shortly. This is Jamaica Plain. That's the same building that's on the cover of the book. Greg Bemis, by the way, took that picture. Look on the back in small print. I give him credit for it. I'm not going to go into too much on serial. How do you know and how do you profile serial arson cases? We don't have time for that. Let's go. But it's just some of the amazing pictures. The reason so many of these fires got like this is because these guys knew what they were doing. They knew the city. They stole 13 of those 14 missing fireboxes that year. The reason they do that, if you set a fire at A and B Street, but you stole the box at B and C Street, and the firehouse is closed at C and D Street, reporting these fires in the middle of the night in Roxbury, Dorchester, JP, etc., gets delayed. Every minute it's delayed, that fire is growing rapidly. And that's why so many of these fires got like this. Now remember, because you have only a couple guys on each piece of apparatus that showed up too, you didn't have enough firefighters to lay the hose and put these fires out.
And they were also listening to the scanners, so they know when the trucks were out at a call someplace else, we'll go light a fire in that area because there's nobody to respond right away.
Exactly. I absolutely love this picture here. This firefighter has a flaccid hose. Doesn't have water yet. Well, he's not going to put that house out anyway. Hey, but maybe they can save the exposure building. Each fire had to be investigated. Now imagine, Boston Fire was doing most of the origin and cause on these fires, and these buildings typically didn't have, until you got to the commercial buildings. Now, every building they burned was unoccupied at the time they were burning it. The commercial buildings were active businesses, but not operating at night, so they're unoccupied. But every fire is a separate incident. You have to you have to go through the routine, interview the owners, whether it's a house or a business. How about employees? How about disgruntled employees? How about competitors? How about insurance, lawyers, eyewitnesses? A lot of work. Could this case happen today? The uniqueness? No, I don't believe so. We did not have cameras at every corner, on every doorbell. We did not have social media where you might fall apart. How do you hold this conspiracy together like this for 2 years? You don't have GPS back then. You don't have tracking by phone, cell phones, by cars, everything. So I don't believe you could hold this conspiracy together. This is part of Sparrow Toy. Sparrow Toy, because of this fire, they moved to New Jersey. So you got a loss. You got 33 firefighters hurt, where the city has to pay for that, in a sense, forever. You have a building that you have no taxes from anymore, and you got like 30-some employees out of business. So it really can affect a lot of things. That's the first fire that the NRT, the National Response Team, came to in Boston. I was a member after this fire. There's 4 teams in the country: Northeast, Southeast, Midwest, and West. And we respond to any incident within 24 hours. A large dollar amount, or loss of life, or injuries. The reason I have these pictures is this was from the first indictment. This is part of the list of violations under the conspiracy. I like this page because June 11th only, this comes from Bobby Gablowski's memory first. It wasn't like the total indictment. We had superseding, meaning follow-up indictments. And June 11th, 1982 was the busiest night in Boston Fire Department history. There were 10 fires that night, 9 of them multiple alarm fires. Okay? The reason I like this page is because June 25th, 1982, my second daughter was born. First daughter was only 14 months old, and my second daughter born that day, and guess where Wayne Miller's head was? Torn between the hospital, my wife, the kids, and trying to find out what happened. That's just the way it is. It gets under your skin. I think that's the video that I couldn't get to go. South End fire, oops. Watch this, watch this, look at that. That 100-plus-year-old church, is that got to be about 25 feet across? Destroyed, look at it. And the Larry Bird shorts over here in the corner. Look at it. That was in the South End. This comes from Boston fire history. Just to show you June 11th quickly again. There's the Brookside Ave JP. That's the 9-alarmer. That's the photo. And a 6-alarm, and a 3-alarm, and a 5-alarm. All the same night, plus 6 other fires. This is the Boston Sparks Club building in 1983. Because Stackpole and Ray Norton weren't allowed in, they were voted down, they hated these guys. Even so, Grabowski and Gorman were members, and they planned this dramatically, and they planned it very well. It's the same building. Ziola Brothers Mechanical had the lower 2 floors. The old club, Box 52, which was another Sparks Club, had the 3rd floor but vacated before the fire, and then the Sparks Club lost a lot of equipment on the top floor. Just another fire. That Jamaica Plain building, now doesn't that look a lot like, they did it twice. The same building was so big, they did it twice. Nope, months apart. American Telephone, yeah, yep, exactly. The reason I have a Norwood engine here, they were the first responder for one of those June 11th fires. So about 17 miles or something, maybe, and they didn't know where they were going. You didn't have a map that showed you exactly which house it was. Knucklehead Bobby Grabowski is riding on Donald Stackpole's fire truck. Donald is driving. His South Shore Fire Department. That's his own fire department. Oh, then, as Paul mentioned, we were doing surveillances in the city and stuff in the summertime. We were on top of buildings in South Boston because that's where quite a few of these large fires happen. And we had mobile units down below, and we'd be on the radio and say, hey, somebody's coming down B Street. Can you stop them and identify in the middle of the night type of thing? Sort of like a stop and frisk, right? But, you know, you're not profiling anybody except driving through the area. But guess what? There were no fires any time we did a surveillance in this area because Ray Norton was working in fire headquarters and knew that we were out on surveillances and stuff. So, a very dramatic night. 4 major fires in Fitchburg. Fitchburg doesn't get many fires. They did 4 multiple alarm fires in one night. And I'm going to tease you. Somebody almost died that night, and it wasn't by fire. That's a good tease. It's going to be one episode in the TV show, by the way, because of how dramatic it is. Now, this is the beginning of the end. This is what I mentioned. This is Garrity Lumberyard. Was on the Reedville, Hyde Park, Dedham line. And that was the second time they hit the lumberyard in a month. And I have the video of it, but I don't know if I get it up there. It's already 8 o'clock. So that's when Nat Whittemore got the camera on these guys. Okay? And again, it doesn't make them arsonists, but it gave us a lead, interview the right people, get the stolen firebox. As box 1712 is the very first one. Funny thing is, we were interviewed Bobby that night in Weymouth. We both lived on the South Shore, Billy Murphy and I. We lived on the South Shore. We finished interviewing him about 8:30 at night. This mimeographed piece of paper was under Billy's blotter on his desk, downtown Boston. Guess where we went after we interviewed Grabluski? We went into Boston to check, and then eventually came home, but we felt a little different going home that night.
And as an investigator, we love criminals that keep little souvenirs from their crimes.
Well,
It comes in handy later on.
we got the search warrant for the next day, and he wasn't home when we got there, and we were let in by the apartment superintendent, and it was still sitting in the same spot. We get no respect. Now, why? We're asking questions about him knowing fires? You would think he might move it somewhere? Nope, still sitting there. So then Sandin gave me tidbits. We actually put a wire on him in the middle of the summer, but the wire didn't work that night. I wonder why. Then he gave me the information on the stolen car, and because we had interviewed Grabluski, he took the polygraph, and we got this. Fires did slow down, but they didn't stop. As a matter of fact, while he's giving me information, this guy, while he's giving me information, he set 50 of those fires with other people. Never, even when he confessed in front of the judge, you allocute in front of a judge and tell him part of the story of your involvement, he didn't do it. The judge, the federal judge, accepted his plea without the proper story coming from the defendant's mouth. We had a new supervisor in December 1983, Phil Tortorella, and Phil said, Wayne, you got something here. Focus, concentrate. Get Grabluski. Go talk to him. In a very dramatic scene. I detail it in great detail in the book. Deputy Superintendent Jack Gifford. 2 detectives. Senior Special Agent Jimmy Karolides, approaching 50 years old. A little big around the chest and stomach, his hair silver back, dark eyeglasses, 3-piece suit. Grabluski sitting in a chair furthest from the door. He's not under arrest. We're not interviewing him about the stolen firebox, so we don't have to have an attorney for him. Very dramatic scene, how he confessed, the words that were spoken. Jimmy Karolides was a card-carrying thespian. He was an actor in plays on the North Shore and elsewhere. He should have got an Academy Award for that performance that night because Bobby confessed. What do you want to know? He'd started spitting out like 29 fires in a short period of time. There's actually Bemis's car that we got. Grabluski's is charred now. It was when we got it impounded. Somebody at the impound lot burned it. We don't know who or why. It's a typical firebox. Oh, just a little tidbit. How many firefighters in this room? You've been to the newer fire academy? the nice building that we have there, facility. Well, that's all because of Greg Bemis. Greg burned the old fire academy all by himself. And before he did, he stole some of the breathing apparatus. He still takes credit for giving firefighters a nice new place. You know? Correct. Now, these guys were domestic terrorists long before that became a popular term. I called them that back then. Look at this. Greg put this Hollywood-style letter together with the blessing of the group. Sent it to WBZ. WBZ called Boston Fire, who picked it up, brought it over to Boston PD for fingerprinting, nothing usable at the time, put it in a drawer. Didn't even tell ATF, even so we worked with them every single day. Not that we were magicians, but eventually when ATF did get it, they did a little better job on getting the fingerprint. By then we had a suspect that matched Greg Bemis on one print. I want to read it all to you, though. I'm Mr. Flair. You know me as a Friday Firebug. I will continue till all deactivated police and fire equipment is brought back. If abandoned buildings are torn down, occupied buildings will be targeted. That is a threat. Another charge in the conspiracy. Terrorism. So, we interviewed Gablowski at Boston headquarters on the night of January 12th. I had the pleasure of placing him under arrest after the Assistant U.S. Attorney, Robert Mueller. You all know his name now. He was second assistant under Bill Weld at the time. He came out in the middle of the night and said, you have to arrest him. So at about 3:24 a.m., I arrested Bobby on now January 13th, Friday the 13th. It really was. Unlucky for Bobby, lucky for everybody else. And I'll tell you, we worked our butts off afterwards because we had to corroborate what he said in case his confession got thrown out. We had to work really hard and start putting the case together on the other 8 characters. So we finally arrested him on July 25th, and there were some threats to murder some of the witnesses by Stackpole. That caused Bemis to come over to our side. You recognize some of the faces here? Yep. So Bemis came over. He testified brilliantly in 2 trials. Grabowski, not too bad. We had 17, we wired Bobby 17 times. 8 of them or so were phone calls, and the other 9 were in person. We got such golden gems out of those undercovers recordings that some of the guys had to plead guilty, especially Bemis. He talks a lot.
Another thing we like is investigating.
Yes. Yeah, Stackpole was in November of '84, his trial, 3 weeks, and then Norton. They had a lot to lose, being a firefighter, owning a security company, those type of things. And I'll tell you another little thing. During Norton's trial was January. I leave the house in the morning when it's dark, get home at night when it's dark. Couldn't find my keys one day during trial. I must have locked them in the car. Now think, this is a 1980-something car, right? Early 80s. And I go down Post Office Square. A lot of you know what it looks like. I'm parked on the far side from the old courthouse. And there were light snow had fallen all during the day. Everything was covered with like an inch of snow, except for my car. It had been running for the 12 hours. Unlocked doors.
And if it had overheated and caught on fire, you would have blamed them.
I would have blamed the car, right? I did have to get gas on the way home. Just quickly, Stackpole got the longest sentence, 40 years. He got out after 23 or so. Under federal guidelines back then, you could actually be eligible after 10. He's permanently housed in the Braintree, Massachusetts cemetery now. He died about 2 years after he got out. He was not old. He was like 55. Yes, yes. Bemis, who signed a 30-year agreement initially, got out after a little over 10, but he testified in 2 trials and helped a lot. And Grabluski, the first one in, got a 12-year sentence, got out just after 10. Norton, who'd never set a fire, the firefighter, he just joined the conspiracy, let them use their house, pointed out some places they could burn. He got 4 to 6, and the other people got 4 to 6, except for that guy who said, I'm going to help Grabluski. He got like 2 years. Lenny Kendall's the only one, by the way. Greg's friend did not go to prison, he had probation. He was there the very first night, and then joined the Air Force, and became a firefighter in the Air Force. And once we arrested him, we dragged him from England. He was in England at an Air Force base, and then to Georgia, and then home to Boston. He got kicked out of the Air Force and got probation. Fires are way down, especially arson fires like this, since that time period, not just because of these guys, it's because of the training and the advances in smoke detectors and sprinklers and commercial buildings and fire departments. And the investigation side has come leaps and bounds since then. ATF no longer has a task force in Boston for fires, but they do have certified fire investigators, which I was one for 37 years or something. I want to read this to you quickly. The Chronicle, you can still find it if you Google Wayne Miller or Burn Boston Burn or something. You can find the Chronicle. They did a full half hour on this story. And we asked Greg if he would partake. He said, no, it's too close to home. He has a different last name because he was in the witness protection program and stuff, but he lives here. But he said, some people know me by my old name, some by the new name, and some by both names, but I don't really want to do it. But he did answer an email, and this actually comes from the show. I personally felt bad about the injuries, but, now, okay, think about when you apologize to your spouse or something, okay? No buts, no ifs, ands, or buts. But until the East Street Military Barracks fire, most of the injuries were minor in nature, and the members of the group of us foolishly rationalized the good overrode the bad. In retrospect, that was my greatest regret. But I'm putting the but in there because it should be in there. I truly believe to this day that the cutbacks would have been much worse, and the passage of the Traeger bill would not have happened had it not been for our regrettable actions some 35 years ago.
Still rationalizing.
How many people believe Greg Bemis should still be in prison today? If he did serve, each fire is supposed to be 10 years, and each injury is supposed to add 10 years. That would be 20 lifetimes. So form your own opinion about Greg. Again, I'm having dinner with him tomorrow night, but I reserve some of those thoughts I have. Bang, boom, burn. Again, undercover assignments. I already mentioned I almost didn't come home from Maine one day. Can you believe I was a member of the Latin Kings? Do I really look or sound like? But I was in Brockton. Their president wanted to make me his VP. I could speak Spanish back then, but I can't now. That house full of 46 M16s. Why are they in the house in Walpole when they were stolen out of a Danvers Armory in 1976? The Boston police officer happened in 91, October. Actually, it was 3 days ago was, I hate to call them anniversaries, but an anniversary date, in a sense. The Christmas bombs I told you about. And serial arson cases, we had the Garden Country serial arsonist who did like 26 fires in the South Shore. We had one up in Jefferson, New Hampshire, very interesting. And then reverse stings, did I put it on there? But reverse stings is when we hire someone to burn a building for us. And it has to be done just right, such as when an undercover Vermont trooper is buying guns and drugs off of Timmy Roberts, and Timmy says to the trooper, "You know anybody needs a building burned?" And we got ATF agents to do it, to hire him. We didn't solicit him. We even talked him down on the money. But we actually show him a commercial building that he can burn before midnight, and I was on the inside of that building, knowing this guy has access to guns, does drugs, and is going to burn the building that I'm on the inside. That's what was going on with me when he came through the door. So that's in the second book, folks. Questions? Yes, sir.
What was the link between all of the co-conspirators?
I even skipped over that part because I was in a rush. Nope. They met as sparks, as fire buffs, at the Howard Johnson's, right across the street from Boston Fire Headquarters. Because they all chased fires and stuff, that's how they met. And they became their own clique, and then became a militant group. So, good question. I skipped right over it. Yes, ma'am.
What keeps your interest with Greg Bemis if he's full of...
Well, for instance, someone asked me a couple days ago, and I don't know the answer. Why did Greg's mother take him to look to firehouses and fires when Greg was a kid? What was her interest? I mean, she passed away when he was 16 of cancer. And you have to, Greg was not a leader, Greg is a follower. And Greg needed a father figure and didn't have one. So there's a lot of issues like that. And that's part of the reason that I'm friendly with Greg. But still, hope so. I hope so. Sir.
What inspires you?
What inspires me? I tell you, when I was working fires and when I talk about stuff like this, I think you can still see the enthusiasm in my voice and my actions. True crime. Some of this stuff on TV, I don't like a lot of that FBI stuff. Any FBI in here? They do have a true crime show on now that's a little better, and I know some of the stories. But it's fire business and letting people know where I came from. I like to turn around and give to that person behind me. I like to teach, that type of thing. So I've instructed quite a bit, like over 80 times, and 2 years at Cape Cod Community College. So, thank you. Anybody else? If you would like a book, I do have hardcover and softcover, both. It also is on Kindle and audiobook, both. I know it sounds like I'm patting myself on the back in a sense. I don't make a lot of money off my books. If you know anything about Amazon, there's only one person who gets rich. I get $4.65 per book. But I have donated over $7,000 in the last 4 years to fire victim charities. And at this point in time, the sign,
I'll do the pat on the back. You deserve it.
You know, only because I live comfortably. I don't care about making money. If it goes to a movie, I'll make a little more money. Yes, sir.
So a lot of like serial arsonists end up coming back to see the fire, and you were saying you got some good footage of them, and you were able to kind of tie them. Do you know like how many of the fires they went back and saw?
In their case, it's different than someone else setting fires who shows up. And there is training that says photograph the crowds, and that's been going on for quite a while. These guys were different. They set 264 fires. I'll bet you they went to at least 150 of them. But that doesn't make them any worse than the other sparks who showed up at 100, you know, that type of thing. So good question, though.
I have a question that's not specific to this topic, but when a fire burns a home, for example, to the ground, how do you go about trying to determine the cause of the fire if everything's charred and burned?
Absolutely. A very good one comes to mind up in New Hampshire, up in the woods. 2 stories, totally in the basement. The insurance company investigator said it was intentionally set. And he disconnected the tandem oil tanks and lit the oil on fire. I represented him, the homeowner, and he wasn't charged criminally. I never represented a charged person, but it wasn't right. You look at, first thing you have to look at is fire patterns. But when you have a place that's collapsed and burned into the basement, those patterns are dramatically changed to how you can relate that to where the fire started. And they did, and they did it erroneously. I beat the insurance company, then I beat the investigative outfit on top of it in that case. You have to interview. People don't think about the interview portion, the first eyewitnesses. We went, in the second book we went to was these old commercial 4 or 5-story buildings. I think 400,000 square feet burned in 6 buildings. And you just look at it and you shake your head. But the firefighters, somebody called them there, but when they drove up, Building 1, and it really was Building 1, had the fire at the corner on the first floor at the AB corner, the front left side. So that's a good place to start, but it all collapsed down. But we had to get under there to find out, and we did find something down there. You look at electrical stuff, but when a building completely burns in the basement, you can throw that out the window. And the other thing we call fire dynamics is how could a fire start in your living room and progress from your easy chair, your sofa, to the curtains, to the rest of the house. And that's part of fire dynamics. How could it start and move from item to item, type of thing. When it collapses into the basement, you throw that out. I would call that fire undetermined most of the time. Pretty rare, unless you had a device that you could find down there or something like that.
Yeah, so a lot of times the firefighters that were first on the scene, that they make an initial entry into the building, they make observations, and those are key for any fire investigation. What did they see? What did they feel? Where was most of the fire? And even the callers, the initial callers who call it into the fire department, because by the time the fire department get there, it's changed greatly from then. So all the people who see it initially are really important, especially on the ones where it's completely burnt.
And Paul, police officers get there before the fire department most of the time.
And park in front of the fire hydrant.
So, anybody else? Jimmy?
In your Burn Boston Burn book, you talk about how professional they were in starting the fires, that they used tires, they did abandoned buildings that were boarded up, but they would take the boarding off the back so that they weren't seen from the street. I mean, they used Blue Hill Ave, which is a busy street, but the fires were seated so well in the buildings that by the time the fire department got there, there was no chance of putting it out. And in most arson fires, this is my own observation, on most fires, they usually go out. But these people knew how to professionally start a fire and make sure it had the oxygen, make sure it had the fuel, and make sure it wasn't seen.
In particular, Greg had fire investigation training. I'd never mentioned a device to you, but they used a little incendiary device that we could not find at any of the fires until they introduced tires. once they introduced the tire, they put this little incendiary device inside a tire. The tire will burn vigorously and catch the building. But it left the steel belts and the bottom tread, so we could connect one fire to another. But they definitely knew what they were doing. A few of them, did go out, but they did a good job, too. Thank you, Jim. Yes?
With the abandoned buildings now, they're not always abandoned because there's a lot of homeless in there. Was that possible back then?
The question was, the buildings were supposed to be abandoned, but could homeless people be living in there back then? Especially today, is a lot more. Yes, it is possible, but no body was ever found. In one little story, off Columbus Ave, they went in a back alley, and there was what they called a drunk, was sleeping in the alley. They woke him up and kicked him out of there, but they could have burned buildings with people still in them. They themselves went into a lot of the buildings to burn it from the inside as well as several from the outside. Yes. Hey, you teaching this kid?
Now, with one of them being a firefighter and then another being a police officer, if I'm not wrong, and all of them being Sparkies, are you almost surprised that they didn't almost rat themselves out just amongst talking?
Yeah, that is part of the surprise of the investigation, that they didn't. Remember, Bemis was a call firefighter and then a dispatcher for police and fire, and then became a cop. So he had fire training. Lenny Kendall was a call firefighter. Norton was a full-time firefighter, but they stuck together. Even when Grabowski confessed to us and then wore the wire 17 times, if you would email me, I think it's in the back of, it's in the book somewhere, isn't it? I can give it to you, it's not up there, but author Wayne Miller, not Arthur, author Wayne Miller at gmail.com. I don't know if it's in here. Go to burnbostonburn.com, my website. Mike did that. My son-in-law also did the website. It's pretty cool. But it has my email in there, if you can't remember. But if you read Burn Boston Burn and you email me and ask me kindly, please, no, I will send you some transcripts of some of the undercover. I think I have 11 of them, something like that, of the undercover recordings. And you'll see how they talk. And they trusted him then. He lied to them as well as he lied to us. And it was amazing that they held that case together for 2 years.
No honor amongst thieves.
That's right.
Definitely true.
Any more? We got to get running out of here pretty soon. They're going to lock the doors on us, shut the lights.
Thank you for your patience and staying with us. I want to thank
Thank you,
Wayne
Paul.
for coming out and spending the time with us.
I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed a big crowd. I think this is the largest library crowd I've had. Okay. Thank you much for coming out.